The story of Pheobe Bishop is not only the story of a murder, it is the story of a life filled with ambition, hope, and promise that was extinguished by cruelty and betrayal. It is also the story of a community forced to confront its darkest fears, a family broken by grief, and a society reminded once again of the danger that lurks when trust is given to the wrong people. To tell her story is to travel through moments of joy and potential that were destroyed in the most horrific way possible, and to sit with the haunting silence that follows when a young life is taken too soon. Pheobe Bishop was described by her friends and family as radiant. She was the kind of person who could light up a room with her laughter, and she carried herself with a spirit that drew people toward her. Her teachers spoke of her determination, her ability to focus on goals, and her endless curiosity about the world. She was young, full of dreams, and at the very beginning of her adult life. To many, she represented the kind of potential that parents hope to see in their children, a bright star in an often dark and difficult world. Her independence was something she valued deeply. Pheobe had taken steps to live on her own, to manage her life, and to carve a future that was truly hers. She was balancing studies, personal projects, and social connections in a way that spoke of resilience and maturity. Yet independence often carries risks, especially when the people who surround you are not always trustworthy. For Pheobe, the danger came not from a distant figure in the shadows, but from individuals who entered her life and twisted her trust into an opportunity for violence. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came with her sudden disappearance. Her family immediately sensed danger, because Pheobe was not someone who would vanish without explanation. She stayed in regular contact, respected her responsibilities, and had no history of simply walking away. When her calls went unanswered, her texts went silent, and her presence vanished overnight, alarm bells rang loudly. Her family reached out to her friends, retraced her movements, and quickly turned to the authorities. The investigation into her disappearance began urgently. Police canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed acquaintances, and followed digital footprints that pointed to her last known activities. Flyers were distributed, vigils were organized, and local news stations began to broadcast appeals for information. The community rallied around her family, but underneath the public hope was a growing private dread. People knew the statistics. When a young woman disappears and hours turn into days, the outcome is rarely good. The discovery of her body confirmed those fears in the most devastating way possible. She was found in a remote location, hidden as though her existence could simply be discarded. The brutality of her death shocked everyone involved. Investigators revealed that she had not been the victim of a random attack. Instead, her murder was carried out by people she had trusted, people who had manipulated their closeness to her and transformed it into something monstrous. That betrayal cut deeper than anything else, because it destroyed the belief that safety comes from familiarity. The suspects who emerged in the investigation were not strangers passing through. They were individuals who had woven themselves into Pheobe's life with calculated ease. Their motives were rooted in selfishness, greed, and control. To them, Pheobe was not a person but an obstacle, a barrier to their own twisted desires. They planned, they acted, and they showed no regard for the humanity of the young woman whose life they destroyed. Their cruelty was not a momentary impulse, it was deliberate, and that is what makes this crime stand out as particularly horrific. Court records later revealed the harrowing details of her final hours. The violence she endured and the calculated effort to conceal her death painted a picture of cold-blooded brutality. Her killers attempted to erase every trace of their crime, as though her life and her memory could be reduced to a problem to be hidden. They underestimated the power of community, the persistence of investigators, and the resilience of a family that refused to allow her story to vanish. The trial that followed was a grim display of justice in motion. Prosecutors presented evidence that showed beyond any doubt how Pheobe was targeted, manipulated, and ultimately killed. Witnesses testified, forensic experts laid out the facts, and the narrative of her final moments was reconstructed piece by painful piece. Her family sat through every moment, forced to relive the horror again and again as strangers described her suffering in precise legal terms. The defense attempted to reduce the severity of the crime, to paint the killers as misguided rather than malicious, but their efforts were hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. The jury listened, the judge presided, and in the end the verdict was clear. Pheobe's killers were sentenced to years behind bars. Justice, at least in legal terms, had been served. Yet for her family, no sentence was enough. Prison walls cannot repair broken hearts, and justice in court does not equal peace at home. At this point, I want you to picture something. Imagine sitting in a courtroom, listening as strangers describe in detail how the person you loved most suffered before their death. Imagine looking at the people responsible. People who once sat in the same room as your daughter, your sister, or your friend, and realizing they treated her life as disposable. That is the reality faced by Pheobe's family. It is a torment that will never fully end, no matter how many years pass. The aftermath of her murder extended far beyond her immediate family. Her community was shaken to its core. People who once felt secure began to question everything. Parents who once encouraged independence in their children suddenly feared the dangers of trust. Friends who once believed in the safety of their social circles found themselves looking at everyone with suspicion. The ripple effect of her death was not only emotional, it was cultural. It reminded everyone that evil does not always come from far away. Sometimes it comes from those we think we know. Vigils were held in her memory, candles lit against the darkness that had taken her. People gathered to speak her name, to share stories of her kindness, her laughter, and her dreams. These vigils were not only acts of mourning, they were acts of resistance against the silence her killers had tried to impose. Her family became her voice, ensuring that she would be remembered not just as a victim, but as a person with a life worth celebrating. The wider lesson of Pheobe Bishop's murder is one that society must not ignore. It forces us to ask how violence is allowed to grow unchecked, how warning signs are missed, and how vulnerable individuals can be better protected. It raises uncomfortable questions about trust, about the people we allow into our lives, and about the systems that are supposed to keep us safe but often fail to do so. Her death became more than a single tragedy. It became a symbol of the dangers women face every day, and a rallying cry for change. In the years that followed, her name continued to be spoken in campaigns in classrooms and in households determined not to forget. Activists pointed to her case as an example of why violence against women must be confronted with urgency. Her story appeared in documentaries, reports, and awareness programs designed to educate others and prevent future tragedies. The echo of her life and death continues to resonate because people refuse to let her fade into obscurity. There is something haunting about the ordinariness of her killers. They were not masterminds or figures from nightmares. They were ordinary people who made horrific choices. That reality unsettles us because it means the potential for cruelty exists closer than we would like to admit. The banality of evil is one of the hardest truths to face, and in Pheobe's case it was undeniable. Even now, when people speak of Pheobe Bishop, they speak of two things at once. They speak of the horror of her death, but also of the beauty of her life. They remember her laughter, her dreams, and her kindness. They remember how she touched the people around her. Her killers tried to define her by her death, but her community insists on defining her by her life. That act of remembrance is the truest form of justice. Her story leaves us with an important responsibility. It is not enough to feel horror or sadness. It is not enough to grieve and then move on. Stories like Pheobe's demand action. They demand that we create safer communities, that we listen to warning signs, and that we never ignore the voices of those who say they feel unsafe. To honor her is to change because of her, to ensure that her death was not in vain. In the end, the murder of Pheobe Bishop is a story of both loss and resilience. It is the story of how evil destroyed one life, but also of how love and remembrance refused to let that life vanish into silence. Her killers succeeded in ending her physical existence, but they failed to erase her. Her name is still spoken, her story still told, and her memory still honored. That is the power of resilience, and it is the legacy that will outlast the cruelty of her murder.